Epang Palace Fu. Popular reading 1. Epang Palace and Classical Prose. Author, Treman. The name of the Epang Palace comes from where disagreements are recorded in the past dynasties. Different views, check the history books, found that there are mainly the following views. The first point of view is that Epang is named because the palace site is close to Xianyang. Near also, with its go to Xianyang near, and named Epang. The second view is that Epang is named according to the shape of the palace. The four corners are wide. In the ancient meaning can also be explained as curved corners, curved courtyard and so on. The building structure of winding, corridor waist, surrounded by flexion. Reflected this kind of the four corners are wide style and characteristics. It is precisely because of the style of the Epang Palace architecture. In the index of the Shiji Qin Shi Huang Benji, why the palace is called Epang Palace. This with its shape of the palace also, said its palace for a side wide also. The third view is that this palace is called the Epang Palace. Because the upper palace is tall, it's like a room built on top. Because its front hall is located named Epang, so it is called Epang Palace. This view comes from the biography of Jia Shan in the book of the Han Dynasty. The annotation of the biography said, Big hills, named Epang, is said that it's high several like a room built on top. That is to say, the Epang Palace was named because the palace was built on the Great Mausoleum. From the archaeological excavations, this view is also reasonable. The area of Epang village, about 15 kilometers from the outskirts of Xi'an, is the site of the ancient Epang Palace. See from the excavated site. The Epang Palace is located on the high hills. There are still the tall foundations of the palace left here. Near the south village of Epang village, there is a large earthen platform left by the palace. The circumference is about 31 meters and about 20 meters high. In the southwest of the village, there is also a tall rammed earth platform at the ruins of the front hall of the Epang Palace. It is about 1,200 meters long from east to west, 500 to 600 meters long from north to south, and about 8 meters at the highest point. The Epang Palace is built on these high platforms. Just as the Book of Han said, high several like a room built on top. There is also a saying. Chang and Annals explained that is because the palace is adjacent to the mountain. No name, first called Epang. This statement comes from the records of the grand historian. Name it once it's built. Thus, the above views are evidence. It makes sense, and it can be justified. So before the updated material, it's hard to tell who's right or wrong. Therefore, why this famous palace was named Epang? What is the true meaning of Epang? It still remains an uncertain historical mystery. There is also a legend. Qin King Yingzhang fell in love with a beautiful folk woman named Epang. But this beautiful love did not come for a beautiful ending. In honor of the woman he loved, the historical Epang Palace. The Epang Palace was a huge palace of the Qin dynasty. Records of the Qin dynasty. Built in the 35th year of the first emperor of Qin, 212 BC, serving more than 700,000 men. The project was so huge that it was still unfinished by the time of Qin destroyed. After the death of Qin, the palace was burned by Xiang Yu, the king of Chu. The remains of the present Epang Palace. The present Epang Palace site is in the area of Epang village, 15 kilometers in the western suburb of Xi'an. As the National Key Cultural Relics Protection Unit, it shows the existence of history. Today, near the south of Epang village, there is a big soil platform. The circumference is about 310 meters and 20 meters high, all built with rammed earth. The local people called it the place where Qin Shi Huang ascended to heaven. Near the southwest of Epang village, rammed earth meandering, forming a rectangular platform. It covers an area of about 260,000 square meters and is called locally Miwu Mountain. These two places are the most prominent architectural relics in the ruins of the Epang Palace. The Qing dynasty Wang Shizhen once said. Du Mu's Epang Palace Fu, the content of the article is very magical, however, it could not be further from the truth. According to history, the 35 years of the first emperor, the construction of the Palace Vinan Forest Garden, first as a house. Epang Palace was not completed. 25 years, back to Xianyang, said. The first emperor considered that the Xianyang imperial court is small, so the camp of a room for the hall. Today's interpretation of the Epang Palace was not completed, it is to commend the emperor for doing this. Reperformed the Epang Palace. In the winter of 2 years, the right Prime Minister, left Prime Minister, General Feng Ji unstop Epang Palace. Second Emperor Anger, removed from the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister's suicide. Prime Minister Lizi was suffered by 5 horses divided into corpses. Is the end of the Qin dynasty, the Epang Palace did not become also. And taken reference of the history. In the 26 years, and every time Qin conquered a country, it copied and imitated the palace of the country. In the north of the hillside of the same built a Xianyang, so south of the Wei River. From the Yang Gate to the east to Jingshui, Weishui intersection, palace houses, overpasses, pavilions connected. The obtained beauty, drums, and other musical instruments are placed in the inside. Therefore, Du Mu wrote, the maids of the 6 states left the 6 states and rode up to the state of Qin. They would sing later and become the maids of the state of Qin refers to this. This is not called Epang Palace, but called missing, 36 years. It is not the fact that there is the Epang Palace. I just started to tell this apart. After reading Cheng Da Chain Yang Lu, Zhe Yushi Ben Tui Lu have been identified. Just the same thing record for the time being. Modern archaeologists also mostly believe that the Epang Palace is just an unfinished building. Epang Palace archaeological team leader Li Yufang admitted to reporters. No such historical evidence has been found. Peking University History Department Associate Professor Lu Huazu analysis. The Qin Palace should have archives, but at the end of the war in the Qin 8 years, disappeared. The Great Wall built by Emperor Qin Shi Huang can still be seen. But the proof of the Epang Palace. Later on the records of the Qin dynasty that sentence first, build the front hall of the Epang Palace. All the experts say even if the Epang Palace exists, it is far from as big as Du Mu said. At most, only 1%. Zhang Fifei, Associate Professor of History at Peking University, was firmly. The Epang Palace was never built. It is Du Mu that confused the public. Associate Professor Zhang Fifei of Peking University explained with a smile. Du Mu is fabricated. In order to imply that the Tang Emperor should not build much more land. Qin dynasty just destroyed Emperor Yang is not therefore. Du Mu is a brilliant pen can cheat the descendants of the people. Through the above data, we can find that the Epang Palace was not built before it burned. So it is impossible to live in the Epang Palace. The maids of honor and the treasure could not exist. The treasures of the maids are all imaginary by the author. Epang Palace does not exist, belongs to hypothesis argument. Even if it had existed, the author Du Mu was also born in the Tang dynasty. The Epang Palace was no longer there, either. So the Epang Palace in this article is the imaginary Epang Palace. As an argument is an imaginary argument. This hypothesis is the exaggerated characteristic of classical prose. This article is a classical prose from the style. Classical prose when fu comes from fu. Fu is a style between rhyme and prose in ancient Chinese prose. It was developed from the Book of Shijing and the Chusai. Formed in the Han Dynasty and prevailed in the 6 dynasties. Use more exaggerated techniques, speak dual, pay attention to sound rhythm. Gorgeous words, rich in literary grace, called Pian Fu. In the ancient prose movement of Tang and Song dynasties, some literati used the writing method of ancient prose. Make the orderly arrangement tend to the scattered culture. It is different from the Pian Fu in the 6 dynasties and the LV Fu used in the Tang dynasty. It is characterized by an exaggeration. Xu, used to emphasize, is the Fu in the Shijin. The Han dynasty scholars said the words of the Fu, straight spread the good and religious politics and evil. Record things straightforward, repeatedly narrated, clearly a word can be finished, but repeatedly to say. Exaggeration is the use of rich imagination. On the basis of objective reality, purposefully magnify or shrink the image characteristics of things. A rhetorical device to enhance the effect of expression. Also called boast decoration or extravagance. How to do the exaggeration is the method. But choosing what to spread out the exaggeration is the root of Wenfu. The cleverest housewife can't cook a meal without rice. This is the relationship between the material selection and the method of writing Fu. Du Mu chose the Epang Palace of the Qin dynasty. From the point of view of the selection of texts, it is also very exquisite. We know that from the above information. The Epang Palace was not built before it burned down. The maids of honor and the treasure could not exist. This Epang Palace is at best just an unfinished building. Of course, Emperor Qin Shi Huang would not live in unfinished buildings. Then it is impossible to live in the palace maids and store valuables. So, it is this unfinished Epang Palace building. Give Du Mu room to exaggerate his imagination. The Epang Palace in the article only appears in the thinking of the author Du Mu. And the real author of the Epang Palace cannot see him personally. All the words about the building of the Epang Palace are Du Mu's imagination. We can even say that the Epang Palace is what Du Mu imagined for him. The full text is the imaginary architecture, the imaginary palace people, the imaginary treasure. If the Epang Palace is completely and truly placed in front of Du Mu also can't imagine. The author chooses a building that can only exist by imagination as the material to write the text and Fu. It is the need of literary Fu writing spread out exaggeration. And Du Mu is on the basis of imagination to purposefully magnify the image characteristics of things. Such as Epang Palace covering more than 300 miles isolation day. Or narrow down the image characteristics of things. Such as within a day, between a palace, and the climate is not uniform. 4 seasons appear in the day. Such an exaggeration is better than the ordinary exaggeration. So I really do not know that it is the fairyland sense of Epang Palace that made Du Mu's famous literary works. Or Du Mu's exaggerated achievement of Epang Palace fairyland on earth. In short, the Epang Palace's fairyland characteristics coincides with Du Mu's writing needs. Also greatly square into Du Mu's literary vision.